what we're going to do here is that we are going to talk about project management solutions created purely in SharePoint. No Project 2013. No third party, okay? And the reason why I'm saying that is because one of the areas that I'm really interested in, and as you can see on that screen here, I'm just going to point to it, is SharePoint service delivery. I'm really keen on that. The SharePoint service delivery is the connector between the business and actually providing a solution. It's like service architecture. A little bit about me anyway before we begin. Yep, it's Jeff. The reason why I say it's Jeff is because I'm the most northern MVP in the country. I live past Inverness, right at the very, very top. I live next to a whiskey distillery. This box here is from that distillery. Okay, the person who wins the competition at the end of this gets this box. That's the reason why it's a little bit of an incentive for you to stay. Okay, another rather interesting thing about me is that I've written several books. I'm also very much connected with Microsoft Learning, very, very much connected with the Microsoft SharePoint community, especially Microsoft Academy. I work very, very closely with quite a few schools in my area. Also work quite closely with quite a few public sector organizations, all keen on making sure that there is SharePoint service delivery. I'm also mad on the saxophone. I drink lots of rum. I'm currently making a Dalek. I'll discuss that later. I collect thousands of robots. I'm massively into geekdom, okay? Other than that, you can speak to me later on about all those things if you wish. Moving on. So let's get straight into this. This is all about project management. Firstly, I'm not going to talk to you about methodology because everybody in here is a project person. Everybody in here is a project manager. Even my wife is a project manager. We've got 4 horses. Every morning, she gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning to feed these horses, and she does it in a staccato fashion. Every morning, exactly the same way. She's a better project manager than I am. The point is, though, is that project management is all about methodology, isn't it? Put it this way. Hands up everybody who knows Prince. Okay? Hands up everybody who knows SDLC. Oh. Corbett. We've got a Corbett person, my word. RUP. No one knows that one. Rational? No? Another one. Lean. Six Sigma. Oh, someone's putting their hands up twice here. Extreme. Cost benefits. Yeah, there's loads of project management methodologies. There's at least 20. The biggest issue with project managers these days, and there was a survey done just last year in 2014, and 400 project managers from the UK and from the States were asked. These project managers are top flight project managers. They've done the exams. Some of them have worked in years in project management, and yet 50% of those project managers still use email and spreadsheets to control their projects. 30% of those project managers spend so much time trying to chase and update a status report. 30% of those project managers end up trying to chase those teams down, those combined teams, internally and externally. And it doesn't get easier. Companies are growing. More and more project managers are trying to get together. And therefore, that brings out disparate tools. They're all using different ways of doing things. And that's the reason why in that statement there are 4 key words that comes out of it. And that defines the actual process. Let's have a look at one of those words, planning. The most important part of a project is its plan. It's the definition of where you get from point A to point B, to make something better, to make something more the same. And the point is about planning is that you can't keep it in your head. It's not something that you can define and pass on. Project managers do not work via osmosis. They can't say, by the way, I'm going to tell you how to do a task. I've just sent it to you. It doesn't work. There's no such thing as a superhuman project manager. You ever heard of the term, is anyone a SharePoint Superman? Does anyone actually know the whole of SharePoint? Same way. Is anyone an Office 365 Superman? Does anyone know the whole of Office? Same thing with project managers. There's absolutely no way they can know everything about it because there are so many different methodologies and so many different ways of doing things. And therefore, planning is key. We must use proper planning tools, not sending everything via email. And the reason why project managers like to do things via email is because it's easy. Where's my status plan? I think I'll look in my email. Where's that business case? Oh, it's in my email. Where's that risk management report that I got from my friend? Oh, it must be in my email. The only problem is with that is that everyone gets that email. An email goes all over the place, and before you know it, you get utter chaos. So it's all about trying to centralize that plan. Let's have a look at another one word. Information. Vitally important. What do I mean about information? Not documentation, information. Information is relative to something called a project charter. Does anyone actually know what a project charter is? Put hands up, anyone who knows what a project charter is. One person at the back, perfect. True project manager over there. A project charter is in fact the most important document next to the plan. It defines exactly what the project is going to do. It defines the business objective. It defines the team. It lists out the risks. It lists out what the issues are. It lists out where you can get in contact with people. Generally, the best project charter is 1 page long. 1 page long. Okay? I've seen project charters that go on to 50 pages long at least. Problem is that no one reads it. And if you don't read it, you don't understand the project, in which case you just carry on regardless. So the good thing to do is to make sure you have a good project charter. We're going to engage with that. Let's have a look at another word, team. One of the most important parts, obviously, is the team. You can't do a project, you can't get a project done without having a proper team in place. And in order to have that team in place, you engage with them by providing information, such as the project charter, and you also engage with them in ensuring that they use the right tools to get the job done. Fourth term, documentation, of course. Things like templates, things like documentation that allows individuals to know what they should be doing. That is all part of the project plan as well. So those are the 4 terms, but let's see how that works out in the project plan. So a project plan is all about doing work. But in order to do that work, you mark your deviations as you do that work. So you measure the progress in terms of how long a task is taken, but you make sure that you monitor the risks and issues that come out of it. And what that does is that it updates the project plan again. And the reason why I say that is that as we look deeper into this process, there are 3 parts that makes up the project plan. 3 parts, in fact, that makes up the project. So you've got the setup, which is the setting up of the project charter. That's the project charter. Okay? So you set up a team, prepare the plan, set up the organization, identify who the individuals are that you need to report to and get stakeholder information from. Second part, that is the plan. So there's the project lifecycle there that we just pointed out a while ago. There's the outputs, risks, issues, change, value, quality. Good example, Scottish Government building, the Scottish Parliamentary building, okay, completed 2 years ago, was over budget by nearly 160 million, and yet the quality was massively high. So therefore, they measured that. Let's go on. Last one, closure. The interesting thing about having projects is that it's all about learning. Every time you complete a project, you learn something new about it. Every time you complete a project, you understand the risks that were taken, the issues that you managed to get over with and mitigate, and it allows you to learn. That information you can then pass on to successive individuals. Very important to learn how to close a project. So what we're going to do here is take one final look at how that encapsulates into a proper project flow. There's your project charter there. There's your project plan starting to come together. There's the project plan being defined in terms of its risks and issues and users and resources. There's the outline and the outputs that come out from that plan. And there's the cost measurement and the metrics at the bottom. So all of this entire flow, we're going to capture in a SharePoint site with no third-party features. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by covering 6 points. Each one of these points is something in SharePoint. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we're going to meet that challenge. Now, before we meet that challenge, just a little bit of a story for you. I was working with a bunch of students between the ages of 16 and the ages of 25 who are doing golf management degree. They're doing a golf management degree. A golf management degree is where they are caddies. They go out and they set up an event for the people who are playing golf, and they go out with them. They identify exactly what they do from start to finish. They needed to learn project management. So what do? Do you teach them Prince? Do you teach them Corbett? Do you teach them event benefits realization? No, you teach them the process. Planning, information, documentation, information, and how they can encapsulate that as part of a centralized approach of managing a project. So that is the challenge. How are we going to create a small site to do that? In the end, we use SharePoint 2007 to do this. So the stuff that I'm showing you today, you can do in SharePoint 2007. You can do, to a degree, in SharePoint 2003. You can definitely do it in SharePoint 2010, and you can most definitely do it in 2013. In fact, this demonstration here was done in Office 365. So all of this stuff can be done in any one of these versions, to a degree. Please note, we should be considering Office and SharePoint 2010, by the way, in 2013, not the old versions, as they're no longer supported. I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, however, no jumping in. One of the points that I mentioned earlier on about me is that I'm keen on SharePoint service delivery. My background is systems analysis and design. I work very, very closely with organizations in defining how to do things in terms of systems analysis, which is identifying the best way through value management of how something can match a requirement, a direct requirement. And that means going through a number of different outcomes to get to the one area that matches the client's vision, okay? So no jumping in. What do? This is not business analysis, by the way. This is solution architecture. One of the first things, define the solution with the users. Work with the individuals concerned, the entire team, in terms of identifying exactly how do they communicate. Do they communicate using email? Do they communicate using paper? Good example, I worked with an account manager who insisted in working in the way that he wanted. Insisted in working in a particular way. We asked him, is it possible that you could approve some equipment for us? So he said, fine, send me an email. So we sent him an email with the request. He printed out that email. He wrote his reply on that email. And guess how he got back to me? No. Anyone else? No. Anyone else? No. Anyone else? No. Anyone else? No, he faxed it. So he faxed it back to me. And that's the reason for that is because he works in a particular way. So the individual about defining the solution with the users is understanding exactly how do they communicate. Because that is key to understanding how it is that the project manager can work with them. And that then means that you can define and wireframe the solution. And wireframing the solution means that you can either draw it out on paper and send it to them in the accounts manager's way. That would be perfect. Or what you could have done is that you could use Visio to draw up the sites and put the components in the right place. People like to do that. They like to work that way because it's all about visualizing what the site looks like even before they've seen it. So they can visualize it, they can talk about it, they can talk about it to other individuals who are outside of the project, and they can get some agreement through that. And therefore, that means agreeing the component requirements. What are the requirements that make up the SharePoint solution? Do we use multiple document libraries? Do we use multiple lists, etc.? Okay? So, now we're going to go on to point one. Okay? So point one is to provide a home for the project management solution. And to do that, I'm going to show you how it's done. So this is all done using project SharePoint 2013. And what we're doing here is that we're going into Central Admin. Now, I could have done this, obviously, by just going into a normal SharePoint site and creating a new site. I decided to do it in SharePoint Admin. And the reason why I decided to do that is just to show you here that whilst we can enter the name of the site, we can use a project site template. So there's a project site template that comes with SharePoint 2013 that includes some of the components that we need, the key starting components that allows us to create our SharePoint project site. So once we've done that, what we can do is that we can see what that site looks like properly. And you can see that at the very top here, we have a timeline. So we have a timeline that shows visibly where the project is, We have a documents library that shows us, or that allows us to store and centralize our material. We have a task list. Now that's going to become very important in a minute. That's the area that allows us to define exactly how our tasks, our project is going to be set up. So that's the first part. That was dead easy. But remember, I said no jumping in. Of course, you would have defined this solution with the users to even decide whether or not you was going to use a project template. You might have, in fact, decided to start from scratch with a blank site. However, SharePoint 2013 is brilliant at providing that template. The second part, creating a schedule. Now, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this bit. This bit is all about creating that project plan, that overall, overarching feature that allows us to see what kind of schedules we can create. So, project planning is all about output, the information that you provide to your stakeholders. Therefore, you need to provide as many different outputs as possible that fulfills their wishes. There's some key ones that I've developed. The first one is the deliverables log. I'm not really sure if you can see this at the back, but the key points here is that this is an issues tracking list, but it includes 2 further columns. Very important in project management. One of them is called baseline start, and the other one is called baseline due. Very, very important for you to understand that when the project kicks off, that you need to understand what was the original start dates and the end dates of that project, and then to measure any slippages, any changes to that. Okay? So that's a deliverables log. The next one is a late activities log. Again, showing the baseline start, baseline end, the assigned to, but also, importantly, the slippage in days. How many days has the task slipped between the day when it was supposed to start and the day that it has actually started? Okay, so that's late activities. Next one, the Gantt chart. The most important part is the one where, as I said earlier on, humans like to see things visually. Therefore, it gives you an indication at the very top of the task timeline. We're showing which ones are running late, and the other ones down here showing you, again, a timeline at the very bottom here. We'll see how the Gantt chart shapes up in a moment. Next one, milestone. Stakeholders love to know when something, a really important task has been completed. Therefore, that becomes a milestone. And you can output this information in this format, showing the slippage of days of each milestone. Oops. So, whilst we're doing that, the next point that we need to do, and unfortunately I pressed the wrong button on the presentation, which was rather good. Okay, let's get back onto there. And get back into there. Okay, that's fine. There you go. That's what happens when you press the wrong key on this thing. Okay, so moving on. So we're going to create the outline plan. And the outline plan is all about, firstly, using various demos. So the first one is to set permissions to the site. The reason why we need to do this is because we know the team members, the team people who are going to be part of that project. So therefore, we assign them into the site. So this is, again, relatively simple. We already know who the team members are, and we put them into the site. Very important that we do this at the start. And the reason why we're doing this at the start is because the tasks that we create for these individuals are going to be associated with these individuals who are members of that site. The next part is to get the information from Excel. Now, the reason why I say this is because earlier on I mentioned that 33% of those people who were reviewed were told, was said, that effectively they use email and they use Excel as the way they manage projects. So what we need to do here is that we need to get the tasks that are listed in Excel and we need to paste them into SharePoint. So let's do that next. So the next demo is to get that Excel plan and put it into SharePoint. So once again, we're going to go off into the task list, and in the task list, we're now going to make sure that the columns match up. So we've got the start date, the due date, etc. Going to make sure that that compares quite nicely with the Excel spreadsheet. And in the Excel spreadsheet, the date formats are not the same. They're British in the Excel format, but the SharePoint site, when it's created, is American. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that they both marry up. Very important when you're taking information from Excel and putting it into SharePoint. So we're going to change the regional settings here, make sure that it's UK. And also, the other thing that we're going to do is to make sure that the working week, Monday to Friday, and the time during those days is also set. Again, that's used to manage the slippage in the tasks. So we do that. So here comes the fun bit. We're now going to pop over into Excel. We want to copy all the information in that sheet. That's all we want to do. Simply copy the tasks, the times, the date start, the date end, and the name of the individual who's assigned. By the way, those people who are assigned are already members of the site. So they're automatically cross-referenced. And then what we do is, just like in the good old days of SharePoint 2007 and 2010, we swap into Datasheet View. And inside Datasheet View, we simply paste the information directly into that area. Notice what's happened on the timeline. It takes the first item that's in that list and puts it into the timeline. Very important, because that first item is in fact the title of the entire project. One other thing that we need to do then is to make sure that the information displayed in terms of the date over there, the due start date and the end dates, are the same. So the next part of the demo is to make sure that we can create work blocks. Earlier on, I talked about the fact that when you take a project plan that is segmented into blocks, we're going to do this stage first, and at the end of that stage, there's going to be a milestone. And when we hit that milestone, we're going to go into the next stage. Then we're going to go into the next stage. We're going to go into the next stage. Then we're going to complete. So what we need to do is to break up the project into manageable chunks, because then we can assign individuals who are accountable to each one of those stages. So this is the next point where we now need to start indenting that project plan so it looks a bit easier to understand. But by the way, you guys at the back, can you see this? Because you're okay at the back. Awesome. Oh, perfect. Awesome. I didn't realize that was there. Okay, so we've now got a list of tasks here, and what we're doing is that we're now indenting the blocks that we want to have assigned in this project. And I've speeded this up a little bit because obviously it might take a little bit of time to do. Remember, this is a small project. Things like this you wouldn't associate with really big projects. And with really big projects, you might want to go down the route of, say, using things like Project Server, but we'll talk about that later. So what we're doing here now is that we are now forming out those areas. Well, next thing we're going to do is to ensure that the format of the task relationships are done. Now, when I mean a task relationship, an example, when we go to feed our horses in the morning, the first thing we have to do is to go into that field, farm our way through those horses and get the buckets before the horses charge us down, because they're going to eat us alive if we don't get those buckets filled. So we have to make sure that we run into that field, get those buckets, put it down, put the feed in. Obviously, there's a task relationship, yeah? We do that first, then we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this. Okay, so there's a relationship between the two, between those tasks. So what we need to do is define the subtasks of each one of those tasks and link them together. The reason why we're doing this is because on the timeline of the Gantt chart, where it shows the relationships between each one of those tasks, we can see the connections. So what we're doing here is that we're now linking these tasks together using the timeline. So we've done one predecessor. I'm going to speed things up here. Okay? By the way, whilst this is going on, please note this project here is based on moving equipment from one communications room to another. Doesn't really matter. It could have been a project based on me moving horses from one field to another, for example. It could literally be anything. At the moment, what I'm showing here is that we are making connections between each one of these tasks. The reason why we're doing this is because on the Gantt chart, we can now visually see how those connections make up. And notice that each one of those tasks that we've connected on the predecessors are linked. So when we click on them, we can see information directly related to that task. So here's a Gantt chart. And you can see the predecessors have allowed us to connect all those tasks together. Isn't that wonderful? Almost looks like Microsoft Project, but in SharePoint. So we have done some monumental stuff here. We've gone from zero to hero. Basically, we've taken information that was in an Excel spreadsheet that had no feature or form, and we've turned it into something graphical that individuals can understand. The next part, format the timeline. Timeline is a new feature in SharePoint 2013. Effectively, what it does is that it allows you to take information that's in your tasks and then present them in such a way that your stakeholders can see visually where the project stands. This is great when you've got multiple projects. If you've got multiple projects, you can see multiple timelines, and that allows you to see the differences between each one of those projects and how they're performing. So what we're going to do is to format the timeline. So there's a timeline at the top. Here's the tasks that we want to, some of the tasks that we want to put on the timeline. What I've decided to do is to get all the headers. Now the headers are the key sections of each one of those tasks. And you can see at the very top here that what we've done is that we've made sure that they appear in the timeline. And as you can see, for each stage area, we are now putting them in the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to itemize all the milestones. And I want the milestones to appear at the bottom of the timeline. So at the top of the timeline, I want to see all the stages. And below the timeline, for each one of those stages, I want to see the milestones. That allows the individuals, the project manager, to see, all right, there's a stage, that's the milestone that we need to hit, and then we're going to go into that stage. So you see how the human mind can visualize that, okay? I think that this is one of the best features I've ever seen in SharePoint 2013. It's massively underrated. You could use this literally with any kind of list, any kind of issue tracking list that you've got, literally with any one of them. Massively underrated. Okay?
Where were those tasks marked as milestones then?
It's in the project. Yeah. Because the milestones are usually marked as having a 0 duration. Yeah, so that's what makes them a milestone. So what we're doing here is that we're identifying those stages in different colors so they stand out. We're going to do the same with the milestones underneath so they all stand out as well. So as you can see, we've now created a deliverables type report. Okay, we haven't quite entered those dates yet for the baseline start, baseline end. So that's the next thing we're going to do. And that's a deliverables date report. Now, the deliverables date report has the dates in the format of the UK, which is DDMMYYYY. So what we need to do first is to make sure that we have those fields, those columns in the SharePoint list, because they don't come with the issue tracking list. So we're going to add on 2 extra columns in there. And the reason, as I said, that we need the baseline start and the baseline due is that we want to show where the project should have started and where it is now, okay? And the slippage. So putting the baseline start and the baseline end allows us to see that information. We're going to create a view here, and that is the deliverables view. Okay, again, very, very simple to do. And now we're adding the relevant columns that we want to display, including the slippage. And by the way, the slippage column is a calculated field. And what that does is that it takes the baseline start date from the due date, from the actual start date, sorry, okay? So what we're doing here is that we're taking the information from Excel. We want the same dates that appeared in the actual project in the Excel file, and we're going to paste them back into the site. And notice the date formats are not the same at this stage, and that's what we're going to change in a moment. The key is that these dates here are exactly the same as the start dates on the left-hand side as well. We're going to change all the date formats so they are all identical. So all in standard view. So finally, we have our deliverables report, and we now format the timeline so that the timeline has exactly the same types of dates as well. So everything is consistent. project managers and stakeholders can see that all the date formats are consistent. And now a demonstration of the slippage. We're going to make a modification to the actual start and the due date and see the slippage. We can see the slippage on the far right-hand side there that shows a 2-day slippage. So immediately that calculated field is coming into use. Hi. No, it's based on, remember the regional settings that we went into? It's based directly on that, yeah.
You log the actual plan dates, due dates, start dates, and then the actual ones that
Yeah, as the project progresses, you can, yes, that's right. So as the project progresses, the project manager or the individual responsible for the task can update the start and the due date, and it shows the project manager and the rest of the team what's happened to that task and what's the effect on the other tasks going down. Yeah. Okay, so that is a very, very important output that we just covered there. So now what we need to do is that we've now covered everything to do with the project. We've got our deliverable dates, we've got our format of the timeline, we've got our Gantt chart, we've got our list of projects, we've got the individuals who are assigned to it because we assigned them into the site at the start. The next thing we need to do is to add on the risk log. Okay, so anyone know what a risk is? Good, there's one person, 2 people, brilliant. That's great, 3 people. I'm going to explain it to the actual true definition. Is this: a risk is any uncertainty, potential threat, or occurrence that may keep you from achieving objectives. Okay? So what you need to do is identify the risks as part of the project charter. Is at the very start. I'll give you a risk that associates with every single project ever. It is possible that an individual may not be able to work today, therefore that might make a certain task slip. That's a risk, because you know it's possibly going to happen. That will affect every project. Going back to my horses, if I'm not there, that means that my partner takes even longer to do the horses. Okay, so there you go. Anyway, that was a bit of a silly one. Let's move on. I've pressed the wrong button again. Silly person. Never use one of these things. Right, okay. So, moving on. So this is what our risk log is going to look like. The risk log does not come as part of SharePoint. It is not an internal created or a separate component. You have to create it. It's very simple to create though, because it's simply a customized list. So to create the customized list, what we're going to do is that we're going to create the customized list using SharePoint again, obviously. I'm going to call it risk LG. And in there, what we're going to do is to add in the columns that are in that customized list. So I've added 1 column so far. The other columns that we're going to add in are all reference to storing information about the risk, which is the likelihood of the risk occurring, description of the risk, the severity, is it unlikely or highly likely to happen? What is the impact that is going to come from that? What are the actions that you're going to use to mitigate that risk? All the information that needs to be stored. The most important part of storing a risk is who the owner is. Who is the person who is responsible for ensuring that that risk is dealt with? Okay? Also, risks are also linked into the project charter. It's the things that are listed directly in the project charter before it starts. So now that we've added our new risk, what we're now going to do is add in a simple risk entry here. And it's the same one that I mentioned earlier on, which is the fact that there is a people resource issue. So we're going to make sure that that's entered. Now, it doesn't stop there, of course, because what we could have done is that we can take the risk log and we could link it back directly into the task list. Now, why would we do that? I'm going to show you in a minute when we get to the issue log. So here's the issue log. Now looking at point 4. So recap, where have we gone? We've done the project. We've created the site. We've created a risk log. And now we need to create an issues log. So an issues log, slightly different to a risk, isn't it? An issues log is something has happened which was uncatered for. And we now need to record it because it will impact the project. So, the kind of information we will need to store is things like the title, who's that risk issue assigned to, what is the active state on it, what's the priority, what are the tasks that are related to that issue, okay? So, in short, an issue is that. It's something that has happened. I'll give you an example. It's a story, and it's linked to that picture, which I'm going to zoom onto in a minute. I was working for a government organisation, but I'm not going to tell the name, because if I do, then people are going to really smile about it. But effectively, what happened was that one day in the summer, their communications room, which is where they had all of their servers, SharePoint, SQL, Active Directory, networking, everything was in the one comms room. In the afternoon, in June, the temperature soared to a wonderful 32 degrees, hottest ever day in London, absolutely boiling. Unfortunately, in that comms room, the cooling system failed. So the cooling system failed and the temperature crept up and up and up. The service delivery manager, being a great service delivery manager, thought a great idea would be to get water with ice buckets. Fill the water up with ice buckets, get some fans, and then put them in front of the server racks on top of step ladders. If you do not believe me, that's the picture there, okay? What was the result? The result was a melted down comms room because the condensation from that bucket went straight onto that server rack. That was an issue because at that point, all those servers were about to be moved, but they couldn't. Why? Because the entire business has shut down, okay? Now, the reason why I show this is because anything can impact the project. It's not just stuff internally, it's stuff externally that can obviously impact the project. So what we need to do is to make sure that we have some way of recording all of those so that the stakeholders immediately know that there is an issue. Thankfully, in SharePoint, there is already a list that we can use, and it's called an issue tracking log. We can immediately take that, and all we need to do is add on just one more column. So we're going to add on one more column, and I'm going to call it related risk. Now, the reason why I say I want to link the issues to the risks is because what I could have done in my risk log at the start of the project in my wonderful project charter is that I could have said, there is a risk that during the summer we could experience high temperature. I could have said that. I could have also said another risk. There is a risk that we have put all of our servers in the same comms room. Single point of failure. I could have said that. So that means I can link issues to risks so that when the comms room does eventually melt, we already knew that there's a potential that that would have happened. So very important to try and link your issues with the risks. So, what have we done? Site, plan, risk, issues. Now, the most important part of all of that is somehow getting information into that site. Knowledge, as much knowledge as possible. Knowledge for individuals who are going to visit that site, meaning the stakeholders. Knowledge for the individuals who are part of the team, so they understand what they're doing. Knowledge for how individuals interact with that site in terms of communicate with each other. So we're going to add in quite a bit of documentation. Does anyone know what M.A.R.S stands for in Microsoft? M.A.R.S? Microsoft Office Specialist. Has anyone done Microsoft Office Specialist? Awesome, well done, that man. Microsoft Office Specialist is by far one of the most important certifications you can get these days. I'll tell you why in a moment, but it's actually linked to Microsoft Office in the way that we're going to show some stuff here. Okay, add documentation. So the first thing is that we're going to make sure that key information is available on that site. So what we're going to do is to add in some documents that were stored on a network drive somewhere, and we want to put them inside SharePoint. These particular documents are very important because they cover the kind of stuff that the project manager most probably would have emailed to the rest of the team. Project plan objectives, templates for them to fill in when they go on holiday, change initiating forms, overtime forms, all those kind of stuff that means that individuals should be going to one place to get this information as opposed to going to elsewhere to get it. So it's very important. I know this sounds like a very simple step, is simply going to a project file, is simply going to a shared folder and just dropping some files into SharePoint. But that is so important in terms of user adoption, communication, user experience, collaboration, vitally important to make sure that you centralize the information. SharePoint means share point, so that means you need to share the files and point them into one direction. That's exactly what we are doing there. The next point, add documentation, and that means that the site users need to be listed on that site, so that when individuals go onto that site, they know who the project members are and how to contact them. So we're going to use a very simple web part for this. We're going to use contact details. First contact detail we want to put on that site is the project manager herself. So we put her at the top. And then we're going to add in the site users. Now, how do I add in the site users? Well, that's quite simple, because the first stage of us creating our project management solution was to create the team site. And the first thing I did in that team site was to add in the members of that site in as users of that site. So now I can use that web part called the site users, and I can encapsulate those users that I've added onto the site and list them accordingly. So who's managed to use these web parts at all in SharePoint? Awesome, great, that's great news. But again, very, very simple step. But the reason why you're doing it is to make sure that individuals, when they go onto the site, know how to contact other individuals. I've seen so many sites where they haven't done this. It's incredible. It's the fact that if you've got users listed, why don't you list them? What if you've got users permissioned onto a site? Why on earth don't you list the key people on the site? So now that we've done that, we now see what our tasks look like. The good thing about this is because Mary Anderson is logged in at the moment, so what we can do is that we can flip between Mary Anderson and another individual who a task has been assigned to, and when that individual goes onto that site, they will see their tasks. So you can see how everything is starting to link up now. There you go. So what we've now done is that we've now updated the tasks. We can now see Tony Smith's got his own task there, and it's also listed on the timeline as well as to which tasks he should be doing, and he can immediately access the documentation that he should have access to. And he can also see all of the tasks in terms of the timeline that he's also responsible for. And the last part of this section is to add in project templates. And using project templates, it means we can use things like content types. So we can now define those documents as part of content types in this document library, so that when an individual needs to update, say, a weekly report on their tasks, they can go to the document library, click on the new document, and select from this relevant content types the type of document that needs to be filled in. Again, extremely simple, and yet individuals do not do this. All they do, in fact, is take the documentation and put it into the document library and just assume via osmosis, I remember that word, that individuals would just know how to do this. They need to be guided. Hi. Associated?
Associated documents.
Where's that?
You had a column there called associated documents.
Yes, associated documents. Okay, associated documents is a lookup column that allows you to connect your documents library to your task list. So that is a really important point. What you can do, earlier on, I was showing the fact that you can link your risks to your issues. There's no reason why you can't link, as you say, your documents library to your tasks, so that when an individual sees their tasks, they can see their documentation that's relevant to that task listed against it. Makes it much easier and much more productive for them to get access to that information. Be a very important point. Thank you very much. So adding on the content types into that document library. So now when we go into that document library, we can now see the relevant types of templates that we can use so that individuals can update that information. And please note, this is a simplistic approach of doing this. You can further customize that document library as you go forward. So, one part of the project is to capture cost data. The most important part of a project is a project manager's task is making sure things are done in time, but through by management of their costs to do that task or do that project. So we need to see the cost data. Now, of course, this is another kind of information that the project manager may well send to other individuals using email. They've got an Excel spreadsheet with their cost data, so they email it to everybody. But why don't we take the cost data that the project manager updates on the SharePoint site, make it visible in SharePoint in the browser, and then allow individuals who have got access to the site to see it there? Isn't that easier? So what we're doing here is that we're simply taking that cost data. Very simple Excel spreadsheet, this. Didn't want to spend too much time on showing real data on this one. It's just to show the process again of taking information that is stored on the site and exposing it in the browser. Part of the user experience. So we're just finally configuring this. We're putting on 2 web parts for this one. So by the way, folks, all of this entire presentation in all these videos are still are available at the end. I'll tell you all about the resources, but you can access all of this. So by all means, if you feel that this is too fast or certain bits I've missed, you can definitely see it all again at any point. So what we've now done is that we've added 2 Excel spreadsheets into there so we can see them directly on the screen, and we'll put them on the quick launch bar on the left-hand side, because as part of the wireframing of the site, the individual wanted to make sure that the page, the dashboard page, was available on the site as well for stakeholders to get immediate access to. So we have a method by which individuals who are visitors to the site, who are, for example, stakeholders, can access information directly without having to get it through email. This is the key point of communication and collaboration in terms of how you farm information from individual to individual. So, the next part, I mentioned that Project Charter is without doubt, in terms of managing a project, the most single important document you can have. If you do not have a Project Charter, you do not have a project. I know this might sound a bit sort of bizarre, but if you understand it, if you have no idea of the benefits of what you're doing, attempting to achieve in a project, then why are you doing it in the first place? A project charter is defined for you to enter objectives, cost, risks, and then members of those projects and how it is communicated to the stakeholders. So it's the key point document that you must have on a SharePoint solution, irrespective of what it is. So here we go. We're now going to put that Project Charter. Project Charter is simply a document. It's a document that was uploaded into the document library. There it is there. So what we're now going to do is to get that into the browser. And this is what it looks like in the browser. Okay? This is quite a big Project Charter, this one. I did say that a Project Charter should really be just 1 page long. But I wanted to show a rather big one in the browser just to show you that there's no real limitation. But the key thing about this one is that there is, in that Project Charter, a particular section that might say, here's a list of tasks, here's a list of risks, and here's a list of issues. And what you can do with those is that you can turn those into hyperlinks, which are then linked back directly onto those areas within the site. So we can view the charter, and that's what we're doing on the quick launch bar. We can see the charter in the browser. We can go down to the various sections. You see, for example, there's the risk log, the cost sheet. I've just squared them there. And what we can do with those is that we can turn those into hyperlinks. So when individuals go into this document on screen, they can click on that and go directly to those items that are displayed in the site. So you're now linking the charter to the actual project in place. Wonderful way of doing it. So what have we done? Created the site, created the plan, created the risk log, created the issues log, found a way, a method by which individuals can communicate. We have so far hit P, plan, I, information, D, documentation. Okay? So we've hit those 3. Last one we're going to hit is planning simple metrics. And metrics are analytics. Did you know, for example, that a new SharePoint job has appeared? Okay, I saw it last week. SharePoint data scientist. You ever heard of that one? No? Everyone's shaking their head in astonishment. I'm afraid it is true. Google, about, let's see, 2 months ago, recruited 8 data scientists. Simply, all they had to do is mine data, okay? However, there's now jobs appearing for SharePoint data scientists, and what they do is that they have to mine data. And the reason why they have to mine data is because they need to understand Excel and SharePoint. This is the reason why I mentioned earlier on, M.A.R.S, Microsoft Office Specialist, very important, okay? Let's continue anyway. Estimating resource costs and needs. One of the parts of that project plan, the flow of the project, is to capture resources and the costs. So what we need to do very quickly is to show how we can capture those simple metrics. And what we're going to do this is to use Power Pivot. We're going to use a certain component within Excel that allows us to take the tasks that we have got in our SharePoint plan, on SharePoint, take them into Power Pivot in Excel, expose the duration of the days of each one of those tasks, and have it displayed in the browser. The reason why we're going to do that is so that the stakeholders can immediately go in, and the project manager can immediately go in onto their site. They can see the lists of all the projects and all the tasks that they've got, and they can see graphically the duration of each. And that's what we're doing here. Has anyone used Power Pivot? Good move. This is great. Again, another unsung hero. Okay? I think it's an unsung hero because people do not understand probably yet the power of taking Power Pivot data and exposing it directly in SharePoint. Not leaving it in Excel, but bringing it into SharePoint so that individuals can go onto that dashboard page, see cost information, and also see analytical information that is relevant to the project. That's where the people like CEOs, executives are really keen on seeing dashboard information. They can get to it straight away. A majorly unsung hero. So what we're doing here is that we're simply configuring that. We're saving that information, and we're going to put it right back into SharePoint. Okay. So we've got our analytical information. We'll drop that into SharePoint. And then what we're going to do is on the dashboard page, the page that I created earlier on, right there, is that we're now going to add on that information from that sheet, that Power Pivot sheet. We're going to expose it onto that page. Again, same thing, Excel Web Access Web Part. We're going to use that again. We're going to target the area within that sheet. There we go. Just enter the duration chart, put that in. And now, seeing as we've done that, we can now see the information from that chart showing the Power Pivot. We can now query that information showing specific tasks. So I want to see, for example, just the key stages, and I can see the key stages shown diagrammatically in the same way as the timeline. But it allows the individual to choose which ones they want to see. Again, brilliant web part to use for this kind of stuff. Okay, so we have now completed all 6 steps. So let's recap on them. What did we do? We created a home. We did that. We created a project site using the project site template for SharePoint 2013. Reason? Because it has the key elements of that. It's got the task list, the timeline. Very important. The next bit we did, we created the schedule. The schedule was all of this. We created tasks. We assigned people to those tasks. We defined predecessors, the way that they are connected to each other. We also refined the Gantt chart so we can see graphically how that is displayed. We also refined the timeline. Very important part of SharePoint 2013 is to see diagrammatically where our tasks sit within our projects and the milestones, etc. We also went on to number 3. We created the risk log, and in the risk log we did this. We used it by creating a custom list. We injected specific fields into that list. We wanted to make sure we had the severity, likelihood that things would occur, etc. We recorded all of that. We also wanted to make sure that each risk had an owner, and therefore there was accountability. Finally, on number 4. On number 4, what did we do? We used the issue tracking list from SharePoint, and we connected the issue tracking list onto the risk log. And then we also take the risk log and attach that onto the documents library so we can connect things together. And number 5, we added documentation, and the documentation we added was all of that. Most important part, project charter. I cannot underestimate how important that document is to a project. Vitally important. Needs to be shown on a site. And number 6, add simple metrics. Use things like Power Pivot, and from Power Pivot we exposed information from the task data and produced it and put it onto SharePoint. Now, I did say that service delivery is key. One of the things that all the things that I blog about and I write about too with Microsoft TechNet and Gartner, etc., is all to do with service delivery. Service delivery is M.A.R.S. Okay, that's what I call it, M.A.R.S. Maintainability, availability, repeatability, sustainability. You cannot have a SharePoint solution unless you have that. You cannot have a SharePoint solution unless you can maintain it. You cannot have a SharePoint solution unless it's available. You cannot have a SharePoint solution unless you can repeat it. This is repeatable. The reason why it's repeatable? Why? Because everything I've done is internal. I haven't used any third-party tool. I haven't used Project 2013. I haven't gone outside of Office. I haven't even gone outside the user's comfort zone. As I said earlier on, Microsoft Office Specialist, vitally important. I'll talk about a bit of that just in a second. Finally, sustainability. Remember, projects have to be closed. You have a project that completes, it has to be closed, or it has to be archived. So if you have a way of sustaining those projects that you have closed, you've got a way of making sure that individuals get knowledge, more knowledge about things that have happened on that project. It allows you to get better and better and better. So it allows you to sustain what is going on within the organization. Now that said, even though I've committed to going down the service delivery route, there's absolutely no reason why I couldn't do all those 3. Absolutely no reason. I could have added tons of workflows into that. I could have used Nintex K2. I'm not even going to mention which kind of one that you should be using. But what I'm saying is that you could use any kind of workflow on this to encapsulate and increase the productivity of those tasks in that site. You could have used a workflow that said, at the end of the month, what I want to see is all the tasks which have been completed. And I want them listed to all the individuals. Every day, what I want to do is when a task is started by an individual, I want someone else to approve it via workflow, for example. So there's loads of stuff you could have done on that. Project, client, and server could be useful. The reason why I say could be useful is because in smaller organizations where they're not so keen on using things like Microsoft Project, for example, and are more keen on just getting jobs done, you might find that that is a hindrance because it means that there's much more going on in Project Client. There's a lot more features that are involved. Integrate Office wherever possible. I've talked about the fact that even though email is used as a way of trafficking information across via project managers, it's also a very useful mechanism, obviously, in making sure that people get things done. I'm not saying that, obviously, you should not be using it, but what I'm saying is that there's other components of Office that you could be using. I mentioned Power Pivot, for example, as a product that could be used. You could also use things like PowerPoint, for example. I also mentioned Visio for wireframing. You could also use that. So there's loads of other Office items that could be useful. Now, with Office, I'm going to quickly mention Microsoft Office Specialist. Microsoft Office Specialist is an accreditation created by Microsoft way back in, probably before 2007. Okay, it relates to Microsoft Office, used primarily with Microsoft Academy, now pushed heavily into schools. M.A.R.S, Microsoft Office Specialist, is equivalent to ECDL. Does anyone know ECDL? Yep. European Computer Driving License is what kids take when they go into college and they want to learn IT. They do the ECDL. There's another one, ICDL. Anyone know ICDL? Yep. International Computer Driving License, recognized by the United Nations. Again, same kind of level. It's all to do with computing and how to learn it. M.A.R.S is equivalent to that. I've seen recruiters now actively looking for individuals who have M.A.R.S in Excel because they do not believe that individuals who walk into the organization actually know it. Especially if you are an accountant, how can you prove categorically that the individual has gone through and done an Excel exam. You can only do that by making sure that they can see M.A.R.S on there. So Microsoft Office Specialist with Excel, PowerPoint, Office, SharePoint is in there as well, okay? Is incredible. I've just come from a school where 30 students have just completed M.A.R.S in SharePoint. You realise what that means. You now have children who are coming out who now know SharePoint before they join the organisation. That is an incredible aspect in terms of user experience. It means that M.A.R.S becomes even more important because the way they see collaboration is not the way that not the way that generally has been seen with individuals who assume via osmosis that you know it. These individuals who are coming to the organisation actually now know it. So let's go into the last bit. Thanks for watching. The resources, everything that I've shown today is on that link. spsprjsolution.jeffevelyn.com. You can get the actual site template. That is the template that I use to develop this site that shows the connections, etc. It also shows the document templates and this presentation flavor. And people have, once have seen this, they come up to me and said, Jeff, is it possible that I can actually use that presentation and just show it to some people back at work? Yes, you can. Just get on the internet, you can show that to them if you want. And also, I mentioned something called M.A.R.S earlier on, service delivery. The service delivery is that there. How do you get requirements from the individual, going from documentation all the way through to what kind of features they want, you know, following a particular process? I know that organizations have their own process. I'm just saying that if you don't, there is one there. And finally, of course, due to fantastic combined knowledge efforts in making sure that all PowerPoint presentations are available in one place and are available later on, this is converted into a PowerPoint presentation and is available for your download later on. Folks, that is it. Thank you very, very much. I've got, might have a little bit of time for questions, I don't know. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jeff Evelyn. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.